This is Dr. Richard Glassick, Emeritus Professor of Medicine at the Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. And I'm here in Los Angeles and going to interview Dr. Shaul G. Massry, the Bernard J. Hanley Emeritus Professor of Medicine at the Keck School of Medicine at USC and the Emeritus Director of the Division of Nephrology at that institution. And Dr. Massry has agreed to share with us some of his experiences and thoughts in his long and distinguished career in nephrology. Maybe I can start with a question to Dr. Massry about some of his experiences in his early career in Israel after he emigrated from Iraq.
Well, to begin with, I started my medical school in Iraq, in Baghdad, in the Royal College of Medicine in 1947. But after the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, life became more difficult in Baghdad for the Iraqi Jews, and we all immigrated, my family and myself, in 1951 to Israel. And soon I enrolled in the medical school, in the Hadassah Medical School of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, to continue my studies. When I arrived in Israel, I was at fourth year medical school, and I continued the studies in Jerusalem and graduated in 1951. I then had my internship at Beilinson Medical Center, which is now part of the University of Tel Aviv. After finishing my residency and my internship in Beilinson, I was obliged to go to the army. And in Israel, the rule is that you go to the army for 3 years without pay. I could not afford that. So the army agreed if I sign with them for 6 years, they will pay me. So I did that, and they sent me to work on the Dead Sea area, what's called in the Bible Sodom. This is the lowest part under the sea level in the world, and probably one of the hottest areas as well. The temperature in the summer used to get to about 47 to 50 degrees centigrade. Just to give you an example, if I used to nap for 2 hours after lunch, I used to lose 3 kilograms of body weight, all in sweat. When I was there, I read an announcement in the New England Journal of Medicine that they want to study, the Ford Foundation would like to study the effect of heat on human physiology. So I thought to myself, what an interesting idea. I can create a laboratory here and study these things here alive on the workers of the Dead Sea factories. And I teamed up with a Professor Tour at the Beilinson Medical Center. We applied and we got adequate amount of money to start the studies. And for 3 to 4 summers, I conducted studies on the effect of heat on kidney function, on the heart, on the lung, on the brain, on the thyroid. And these studies resulted in publication of many, many articles and the writing of 2 or 3 chapters on the effect of heat on human physiology. And that what stimulated me to be a nephrologist. After I finished my army service, I went back to do my residency in Beilinson Medical Center in the department of Dr. Tour. And then I decided to come for 2 years to this country, to the United States, for further training, both in clinical and investigative nephrology. I applied to both Georgetown to work with Dr. Schreiner and to UCLA to work with Dr. Kleeman. Both accepted me, so we made an arrangement that I spend a year at Georgetown and another year at Cedars-Sinai with Dr. Kleeman. And I learned the art of clinical nephrology from the master, George Schreiner, who was a wonderful teacher and taught me everything I know about clinical nephrology. Then I came to LA and started working with Dr. Kleeman, and with him I learned how to be an investigator and a researcher. And all my investigative work really began at that time. After a year and a half with Dr. Kleeman, he suggested to me to apply for the investigatorship of the American Heart Association. And I laughed and I said, why should they give it to me? This is a very difficult thing to receive and it's very coveted. And I'm just here a year and a half. Why should they give it to me? He said, you apply and we'll see. I applied and I was interviewed by the late Dr. Bob Vernier. And the interview went so well. When I left him, he shook my hand. He said, you know, Dr. Massry, I sit at the committee which finally will decide on that, and I hope you will get it. I realized that I did get it. And a month or two later, I received the announcement. I got it, and that kept me for another 5 years in this country, in addition to the first 2 years. And that's why I stayed in this country, and my journey of 2 years lasted till now, which is almost 34, 35 years.
Dr. Massry, was there an event or a person which sparked your particular interest in calcium, phosphorus, parathyroid hormone, and bone disease?
Well, when I joined Dr. Kleeman, I really didn't know what I want to do in investigative nephrology. Dr. Kleeman's interest was in calcium, phosphate, and parathyroid hormone. So I joined him in his own work, which stimulated me to further that investigations. You know, at that time, late Dr. Jack Coburn was in the VA and I was at Cedars-Sinai. Dr. Coburn also worked with Dr. Kleeman, so he facilitated our cooperation, and we began to work with Dr. Coburn under the guidance of Dr. Kleeman, and we produced large number of papers published in most prestigious journals in this country. I would consider this period working with Dr. Coburn and Dr. Kleeman as one of the best years of my life.
During that work that you did with Dr. Kleeman and Dr. Coburn, you evolved a theory on the pathogenesis of some manifestations of renal failure, uremia, which was often referred to as the wheel of toxicity, which related parathyroid hormone. Maybe you'd like to share a little.
Yeah, you know, and I think in 1968, we had a patient who was a transplant recipient, in fact, who suffered from tremendous itching. And he had other problems with calcium and bone disease, and he underwent parathyroidectomy. And suddenly the itching disappeared the next day. And that was a peculiar observation, which I thought I couldn't understand. But with time in that year, we did parathyroidectomy on another 5 uremic patients who all had severe itching, and the itching disappeared after parathyroidectomy. We published that. We sent it, in fact, as an abstract for the clinical meeting in Atlantic City. And the same meeting, the group of the late Professor Merrill also presented similar observation. And the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine asked both us and them to send papers, and they were published back to back in the same issue of the journal. This raised the interest in my mind that maybe parathyroid hormone is a cause of that itching, and I developed the idea it may be that parathyroid hormone is one of the uremic toxins. I wrote an editorial suggesting that hypothesis, and of course I could not publish it. But I knew Dr. Berline, who was then the editor of Nephron, and I said, Jeffrey, this is a good thing. Can you publish this for me? So send me, let me look at it. And in fact, that theory was published in Nephron as a theory that parathyroid hormone is a uremic toxins. And since then, that's almost 30 years later, the NIH has supported that research continuously for the last 30 years. We have developed the idea, the mechanism through which PTH may exert its toxicity. We went into the molecular level, and I believe that the idea that parathyroid hormone is a uremic toxin is now accepted, and many other laboratories has confirmed that. And with time, we and others were able to show that every cell in the body has a receptor for parathyroid hormone, and that every cell is a target for the action of parathyroid hormone, and that excess parathyroid hormone is involved in many of the manifestations of the uremic syndrome. This is an important observation in my mind because today we can control the blood levels of parathyroid hormone medically by treating with phosphate restriction or vitamin D, and surgically by removing at least a major part of the parathyroid gland. So the idea that parathyroid hormone is a uremic toxin is not an academic idea, but an idea with far-reaching practical implication for the health of the uremic patients.
Over the years, Dr. Massry, in addition to your laboratory and clinical research efforts, you've also been involved as a leader in many organizations, societies. You've been an editor of a journal, and you've been a leading force in drawing attention to the history of nephrology. I just want to ask you to share with us some of your experiences and thoughts about your work, say particularly in the National Kidney Foundation.
Yes, I started as a volunteer to the National Kidney Foundation in the local chapter in Los Angeles. And I worked there with them for many, many years, and I became the chairman of the scientific advisory board of that foundation, the local chapter. And we were the first really chapter who started to raise money as physicians for the local chapter, because the lay people were used to raise the money and the doctors used to spend it. And that created some kind of a conflict. We raise the money and you spend it. And I said, well, the doctors will raise money. And we did the first testimonial dinner in Los Angeles by the local chapter, which raised many, many thousands of dollars. And that became a tradition that every year the physicians create their own testimonial dinner fundraising event to raise money for the Kidney Foundation. And as time went on, I joined the national organization of the Kidney Foundation, and I was chairman of the scientific advisory board. I was chairman of the chairman of the program committee for their annual scientific meeting. I then was elected to be vice president, and then I became the president of the National Kidney Foundation, I believe 1999, 1992. And at that time, many things happened under my leadership. One, we continued the idea that Dr. Schreier initiated as creating an endowment fund to raise $5 million for the research. And when I became president, there was only about $500,000 in that endowment, and within 2 years, I was able to raise the $5 million and complete that endowment fund, which then were invested, and I believe today it has $9 million in it, which support many, many research endeavors. I also thought that it's time that the Kidney Foundation create a clinical meeting so to complement the ASN meetings every year. And then we created the first clinical meeting, which took place in Chicago, and it was an amazing endeavor. Nobody expected the number of people who attended that meeting. And this meeting now become an established event every year that it provide the cutting edge in clinical nephrology research and ideas for the physicians and the nephrologists.
You've also worked as an editor of a journal, and you've also been an editor of many international convocations, symposia, and meetings, which have brought together scientists from all over the world to talk about particular topics. How would you measure that as one of your contributions to the overall field?
I believe that being a scientist, a clinician, is a wonderful thing. But one needs to find ways to disseminate the knowledge to others. One cannot keep the knowledge for himself. Journals are a vehicle for that. I was editor of two journals, one Mineral Electrolyte Metabolism and the other one American Journal of Nephrology, and they were successful journals, and it was a wonderful experience for me to edit these journals and disseminate the knowledge. But I believe at the time we were involved in the field of nephrology, the world was divided between West and East. And the Eastern countries, which were under the communist regimes, did not have facilities, did not have journals, did not have knowledge, and they were really isolated. And we tried, me and other people in Europe and in the country, in this country, in the United States, to create contacts with nephrologists in the Eastern world, to have meetings and invite them. And that has, I believe, has had tremendous effect on the development of nephrology in these countries. We also, me and others, gave equipment, we gave supplies to these people in those countries, which helped them do research and express their scientific abilities. So I think these things that we have done, I take pride in them, and I feel that I have done a great deal to the progress of nephrology in those countries.
Now, as you've moved along in your career, as many of us have experienced, you've gotten more interested in the history of nephrology. And I think you're now one of the leading authorities in the history of nephrology. You and Nick Noyen and Leon Fine and Stuart Cameron, you must have learned and experienced lots of interesting things about the history of nephrology.
That's correct. This was an idea that Gary Knoyen brought forward. And in a meeting in Italy, Professor Di Santo from Napoli, Knoyen and myself decided to have a meeting. And the first meeting took place in Napoli, which then resulted in the creation of the International Association of the History of Nephrology. And my part in it, I became president of this association 2 years later. But my part in that endeavor in terms of history of nephrology was to examine nephrology in the Bible and the Talmud, and to examine the contribution of Jewish physicians to nephrology. And it's amazing when one reads and searches these things, one finds that many, many things which we now think we discovered were discovered many, many, many centuries ago. I give you one example. In the 11th century, a man slaughtered his cow to sell the meat and eat it. And he found that the cow has a small kidney. So he went to the rabbi and asked, is this animal kosher? The kidney is small. Can we eat it? And the rabbi did not know the answer. He said, I don't know. We need to discuss this among the rabbis and we'll give an answer. Unfortunately, it took almost many decades before they came to the answer. And the answer was fascinating. They told that man that if the kidney is smooth, the surface is smooth, and if the covering of the kidney could be removed easily, it means that the animal was born with a small kidney, and therefore it's kosher, one can eat it. However, if the kidney is small, but the surface is irregular, and the covering could not be removed from it, it means the kidney is sick, and the animal is not kosher. That is the small contracted kidney described by Richard Bright later, but that was described in the 11th century. Fascinating observation. Another example, which was, it's not really in nephrology, but again, it shows you what is the power of observation of people at that time. Again, in the 12th century, Mohel is the man who circumcised children in the Jewish tradition. This Mohel circumcised a boy, and the boy bled to death. So he wrote in his book, I observed that this boy was born with thin blood. And that's all. Next year, the same mother has another boy that he circumcised, and he bled to death. So he said, well, this is the mother. She brings children, boys, to this world with thin blood. We should not cut them. A year later, her sister had a boy that he circumcised, and he bled to death. He says, no, this is not the mother. It is the family, which all the women will bring boys with thin blood and should not be cut. It's interesting, the daughters of these parents don't bleed. So in essence, described hemophilia, the sex-linked characteristic, and the therapy. That was in the 12th century, not by a doctor, but by a rabbi. And hemophilia discovery is credited to scientists later in history. So if you go and read in the Bible and the Talmud, there is a lot about nephrology. And in fact, in the Old Testament, it says God examined kidneys and hearts. In Hebrew, Elohim bohen klayot velev. God was the first nephrocardiologist. And that is said in the Bible. So it's fascinating, and I think this interest is broaden and widen the horizon of our thinking.
Fascinating. Well, let me try to ask some questions that may be a little bit more philosophical than factual, to allow you to share some events in your past. I'm curious as to what is the best piece of advice that you have ever received personally, and from whom did you receive it? It's a kind of maybe a difficult question. But
No,
I'm sure
no, I have the answer to it. The best piece of advice I ever received in my life is from my mother. You know, my father died when I was 4. We had no money, we were poor. My mother worked hard to raise us. We were 3 children. And I was kind of desperate, disappointed that life treat us like this. And she said to me, don't worry. You always work hard and you will reach places. That is the best advice. I always worked hard all my life. And I think the hard work has paid. And I do believe that nothing, people talk about luck in life. There is no luck. We make our luck. We make our luck by working hard, by putting goals in front of us, by trying to achieve these goals. Nobody give you anything. There is no free ride in this world. You need to work hard.
would you give similar advice to a young physician just starting their career in nephrology today?
Absolutely. Not only a physician in nephrology, anyone in any endeavor. There is nothing you can gain without investing efforts. If you invest in your time and efforts, you will succeed.
What about looking to the future? Where do you think the field of nephrology is going, and how do you envision it evolving over the next several
Well,
decades?
I see two issues. One, the etiology and the cause of renal diseases, and all in general, most of renal diseases are immunological in nature. Now, if we can conquer that secret, if we can prevent or find a cure for these diseases, then we will not need dialysis and transplantation. How successful we will be, it remains to be seen. But the progress in medicine and in nephrology is so rapid. If you take the discovery of proteinuria, it took many centuries, while in the last 50 years, the advances has been tremendous. So I believe that in the coming decades, we will conquer the cause of renal disease. If we do that, then all the structure we have today for dialysis and transplantation will implode. We will not need it. But if we assume we will not succeed in conquering the causes and the cure of renal diseases, we're going to be left with dialysis and transplantation. Dialysis, I don't believe there is a limit for it because a question of money and how society would like to support it. And I believe the public pressure to have society support dialysis will continue, and dialysis can expand, facilities can expand. The ultimate success of transplantation will depend on the availability of donors. And I don't believe that we will have enough human donors, whether alive or cadaveric, to meet the needs. And we need to go through organs from animals. And we know today that the best animal who can provide donors, not only kidney, heart, and other things, is the pig. And xenotransplantation now is being really thought about, and farms are being established to raise immunologically engineered pigs to provide organs. And I think with time, not in the very far future, we may have shops, like butcher shops. You go and want a kidney, you want a heart, you may be able to get it. There were one problem with this issue of the pig as a source of donors for both Jews and Muslims, because Jewish religion and Islam forbid to touch a pig, forbid to use anything out of the pig. And somehow they have not resisted the idea of using valves for valve replacement from pigs, and all the insulin in the past was porcine from the pig, and they accepted that. But I wasn't sure that they will accept a total organ from a pig. So I wrote to the chief rabbi in Israel and the chief clerk in Saudi Arabia, because they are very strict in their religion. And amazingly, I got answers which read exactly the same. Two different people, two different religions, the answer was exactly the same. And that answer was, to save life, all rules are suspended. In other words, the religious rules would be suspended if you save life, because life is so precious that no rule should prevent it from flourishing and existing.
Many years ago, you and I visited Pope John Paul for the purpose of trying to convince the Roman Catholic Church to produce an encyclical on organ donation. Do you want to share any of your experiences with that
Yeah,
monumental
that
meeting?
experience really began before he became a pope. He was the cardinal in Krakow. And I was at 19, I believe, 76. I was visiting Poland as a guest of the Academy of Science. And the protocol dictated that if I go to a city, I visit the cardinal. So in Krakow, they took me to visit him, and it was wonderful 20 minutes discussion. Very beautiful, very, really interesting. And I left. Then his physician in Krakow was Professor Kokot, who was a friend of mine. So I contacted Professor Kokot. I said, why can't we arrange a delegation of nephrologists and transplant surgeons to meet with him to urge him to issue an edict that giving an organ for donation for kidney by Catholic is appropriate. So we went through negotiation, and he agreed to meet us provided we send him a letter telling him what we want to discuss. And I did not know what he thinks about organ donation. So I called Cardinal Mahoney in Los Angeles and I said, I may be going to visit with the Pope about this issue. Do you know what he thinks? He said, I tell you, the best thing to do is to call Father Thomas in Boston, because he keeps the protocols, apparently, of meetings that occur every year in Rome in December, a commission which advises the Pope on technology and medicine. And in the last meeting, they discussed the issue of transplantation. And probably Father Thomas has that discussion. So I called Father Thomas. He sent me the thing, and I knew what he thinks. So we wrote him, and he said, all right, you can come. And we went there, and you were with us. And I represented the group by delivering what we came for. And he was very, very wonderful. He said, he supported, in fact said, that organ donation is the greatest gift a Christian can make. That's a profound statement on his part. But his concern was that we be sure that the person who is going to take the kidney from, a cadaveric, is dead before we take the kidney. And he, in fact, issued a letter to almost every Catholic institution urging them to do that, and was very successful. I mean, he really supported this organ donation. It was a marvelous experience, as you remember.
One last question to Massry. As you look back over your 40 years of distinguished achievement in the field of nephrology, one, is there anything you would have done differently? And two, what thing are you most proud of?
I tell you, if I was born again, I will do the same thing. I enjoyed it very much. In fact, I laughed with my wife. I said, what lucky I am. She said, why? I said, they paid me for my hobby. All my life, medicine was my hobby. I would have done it without money, without pay, but I was lucky they were paying me for it. So what a fortunate person to be paid for his hobby. That's a great thing. What I am proud of, before I am proud of my career, I am proud of my children. And those children would not have come where they are without the support and dedication of their mother, because I wasn't home. I was traveling, I was working, I was absent. She was there, she raised them, and I am so proud of them. We have 2 doctors and 2 lawyers, very successful by themselves, and that is the greatest achievement and reward. After that came the profession, and of course I am proud of the profession. I am proud of the people I taught. We have trained almost 160 nephrologists. They're all in Southern California, many of them practicing nephrology in Southern California. They call them the School of Massry. Many of them are leading figures in academic nephrology. So this is a great feeling to have your disciples successful. You get the greatest pleasure from them. The other thing which I'm proud of is I was able to help alleviate the suffering of patients in my own way. Each time I see a patient that I can help, that I can talk to him, that I can calm him. It is a great gift God have given me to do that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Massry.
Thank you, Dr. Glassick.